Nicole's scream burst through my phone so loudly that a man at gate C12 turned to stare. How could you do this to your own family? It was 6:11 on Christmas Eve. My 17-year-old daughter was asleep against my shoulder, still wearing the red sweater she had packed for the family photos my mother had never intended to let her join. On my screen were 38 missed calls, 5 canceled airline confirmations, and one final message from my sister. "Where is Sadie?" I looked through the terminal window, at the runway lights glowing beneath the snow. Less than 6 hours earlier, I had overheard my mother tell my daughter, "You're old enough to stay home alone, aren't you? We want this trip to be for real family only." So, before sunrise, I canceled every ticket, every room, and every airport transfer I had paid for. Then I left a letter on my mother's kitchen counter and took my girl to the airport. My mother's voice replaced Nicole's. "Audrey, listen to me. Did Sadie open box 14? That was the first moment I understood. They were not panicking about a ruined vacation. I tightened my arm around my daughter. "No," I said. "And she won't be logging into the funeral home at 9 o'clock either." The line went silent. It was not angry or confused. It was afraid. Then Nicole whispered something I would replay for months. That batch had to close. At the time, I thought I had only taken my daughter away from people who did not consider her family. I did not know I had just destroyed their alibi, and I had no idea they had once used the same plan against my father. Stay with me to see what my mother had really planned for Sadie, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about quiet betrayals, buried family secrets, and the moment a mother finally says enough. 3 months earlier, I had believed a Christmas trip might fix what years of ordinary Sundays had not. Sadie would graduate from high school in the spring. Soon there would be college applications, dorm rooms, part-time jobs, and all the small distances that arrive when a child begins building a life of her own. I wanted one good memory before that happened. Not a perfect family portrait or a staged holiday card. Just 7 days when my daughter did not have to wonder whether she belonged. The trip was to San Diego. I had saved for nearly 2 years and paid just under $20,000 for 5 airline tickets, 2 hotel rooms, a suite for my mother and Leonard, and an airport transfer large enough for all our luggage. The travelers were supposed to be my mother, Margaret, my stepfather, Leonard, my half-sister, Nicole, Sadie, and me. I never announced what it cost. I did not want gratitude measured in dollars. I wanted breakfast together without someone checking the bill, photographs in which Sadie was not placed at the edge, and one Christmas when my mother looked at my daughter the way she looked at Nicole. In my family, I had always been the person who made things work. When my mother needed a reservation changed, she called me. When Nicole forgot a deadline, I handled it. I booked restaurants, paid deposits, compared flights, confirmed the airport car, and made backup plans for weather delays. Margaret often called Nicole "our girl," with a warmth that made the word sound like a title. She called me Audrey, usually when there was something to solve. The difference was rarely dramatic enough to confront. It lived in details small enough for everyone else to dismiss. The hallway in Margaret's house held years of Whitmore family photographs, but Sadie appeared in none of them. There were pictures of Nicole at graduations, birthdays, charity dinners, and company events. Even the employee photograph from Whitmore Memorial Services included the summer interns, except Sadie. That summer, Sadie had worked there as a temporary archive assistant. She scanned old contracts, named electronic files, and organized document batches. She had no access to bank records, payments, or customer accounts. Her work ended in August, and she had been proud of every paycheck. When I once asked why she was missing from the staff picture, Margaret said the photographer had arrived after Sadie left for the day. Sadie told me it did not matter. She said that too often. On December 23, we all gathered at Margaret's house because our airport car was scheduled before dawn. Suitcases crowded the entryway. Nicole had packed enough clothes for a month and complained that the hotel suite should have had a second balcony. Leonard checked the weather every 20 minutes. Margaret moved through the rooms with a clipboard, smiling as though she had organized everything herself. Sadie wore the red sweater she had bought for the family photos. She had spent an hour wrapping small gifts for everyone, even though Nicole had told us not to bring presents because the trip was already expensive. My daughter was excited, but as the evening went on, she grew quieter. I thought she was nervous about flying, or worried she had forgotten something. After dinner, Nicole leaned against the kitchen island and asked, "Sadie, do you still remember your archive password?" Sadie looked up from her mug. "My account expired when the summer job ended. I reactivated it," Nicole said. "There's one little thing you can finish after the holiday." I stopped folding the printed itineraries. Why would she need to work after the holiday? Nicole waved a hand. "It's nothing. Just clean up before year-end. 10 minutes, maybe." Then she asked Leonard about the airport parking, and the conversation moved on before I could ask anything else. Sadie stared into her hot chocolate. When I caught her eye, she smiled too quickly and said she was tired. By 11, everyone had gone upstairs. Sadie and I were sharing the guest room. Her suitcase stood open beside mine, but she had stopped checking it. I asked if she was all right. She said she was only thinking about school and turned toward the wall. Sometime after midnight, I woke with a dry throat and went downstairs for water. The kitchen lights were off, but a narrow strip of light shone beneath the laundry room door. I heard my mother speaking in the gentle voice she used when she had already decided what someone else would do. "You're old enough to stay home alone, aren't you?" I stopped in the dark hallway. Sadie did not answer loudly enough for me to hear. My mother continued, "We want this trip to be for real family only. You understand? Leonard has been looking forward to having his family together." My fingers tightened around the empty glass. "Don't upset your mother," Margaret said. "She has spent too much money to cancel now." For one stunned second, I could not move. My mother was not merely excluding my daughter. She was using my money as the lock on the door, counting on the cost of the trip to keep me obedient after I found out. Then Margaret lowered her voice. "Tomorrow morning, you'll do the little job Nicole left for you. Then no one can say we abandoned you." I stood outside that door and understood that leaving Sadie behind was not only about who my mother considered family. I did not open the laundry room door. Every instinct in me wanted to step inside, take Sadie by the hand, and demand that my mother repeat those words while looking at me. But if Margaret knew I had heard her, she would begin explaining before I understood what else she was hiding. She would soften her voice, change the meaning of what she had said, and make Sadie feel guilty for causing a misunderstanding. I returned to the guest room and placed the empty glass beside the bed. My hands were shaking, so I folded them beneath the blanket and waited. A few minutes later, Sadie entered without turning on the overhead light. She closed the door quietly and stood beside her suitcase. The red sweater she had chosen for the photographs was folded on top. She lifted it, held it for a moment, then placed it back in the dresser. I watched as she removed a dress, her swimsuit, and the new sandals we had bought for the trip. She was trying to unpack without making enough noise to wake me. "Sadie," I said softly. Her shoulders stiffened. She turned toward me with an expression that was already prepared to reassure me. "I thought you were asleep. I woke up for some water." She nodded and looked down at the dress in her hands. "I decided I don't really need this." I sat up but did not ask whether Margaret had excluded her. I did not want to make Sadie defend anyone or repeat words she was not ready to say. "Come sit with me." She folded the dress twice, although it was already folded, then lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. "Did Grandma ask you to stay here tomorrow?" I asked. Sadie's face changed. The careful smile disappeared, and she pressed her lips together as if she had been holding the truth behind them. "Please don't cancel the trip," she said. "They'll say I ruined Christmas." The words hurt more than my mother's had. Sadie was not asking whether she deserved to go. She was already preparing to accept the blame for being left behind. You didn't ruin anything. Grandma said you worked too hard to lose the money. She said everyone has been looking forward to this for months. So have you. Sadie looked toward her half-empty suitcase. It's okay. I'm 17. I can stay alone for a few days. A few days? She said Leonard wants time with his family before things get busy at the funeral home again. I don't want to make it awkward. I moved closer but resisted the urge to tell her I had heard every word. I wanted her to speak without feeling that she was confirming an accusation. What exactly did she ask you to do? Sadie rubbed her thumb along the seam of the blanket. She said I could stay here. There's food in the freezer, and she left cash in the kitchen drawer. Tomorrow morning, I'm supposed to go to the funeral home for a few minutes. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. I know. Nicole said it's just one archive batch they need finished before the end of the year. What kind of archive batch? I don't know. She said everything would already be prepared. I only have to scan the documents and close the batch. Sadie slid off the bed and crossed to the coat she had draped over a chair. From one pocket, she removed a white plastic card attached to a blue lanyard. The front showed the Whitmore Memorial Services logo, Sadie's school photograph, and the title Temporary Archive Assistant. Her summer badge had been green. I remembered because she had worn it proudly during her first week of work. This one was new. When did you get this? Grandma gave it to me tonight. I turned the card over. A small printed label listed its period of validity. December 24 through December 26. The badge had not been reactivated for the end of the year. It had been created for the exact days the rest of the family expected to be in California. Sadie removed 3 more items from her coat. The first was a brass key marked Rear Staff Entrance. The second was a sealed envelope with her name written across the front in Nicole's handwriting. The third was a folded sheet of paper. Grandma said not to lose any of it, she said. She told me the key would let me in if the front doors were locked. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a temporary username and password. The username was not the one Sadie had used during the summer. It read Sparker, Archive 2. Did Nicole explain why she created another account? She said the old one couldn't be restored. I unfolded the instruction sheet. The steps were typed in a plain font, with several lines highlighted in yellow. Arrive before 8:55 a.m. Enter through the rear staff door. Use scanner 3 in the lower records room. Upload all documents from box 14. Select Finalize Archive Batch. Do not call unless the screen turns red. Why does this have to happen at exactly 9 in the morning? I asked. Sadie shook her head. Nicole said the system has to close the batch before the end of the year. I asked why I couldn't do it next week, but she said the deadline was automatic. There are 7 days left in the year. I know. Did you ever finalize batches during the summer? Sometimes, but only regular archive batches. I scanned the files, checked the page count, and clicked complete. Did that release anything? Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? Did it send the files somewhere, change an account, or approve anything? No, at least, I don't think so. I looked again at the temporary badge, the new account, and the key to a locked building. Sadie had been instructed to enter alone on Christmas Eve, use one specific scanner, and complete a process at one exact time. None of that matched the harmless cleanup Nicole had described in the kitchen. Where is box 14 now? Sadie pointed toward the door. Under the counter in the laundry room. Grandma said Nicole left it there so I could take it with me in the morning. I told Sadie to stay in the bedroom while I went downstairs. She caught my wrist before I could leave. Mom, please don't confront Grandma. I'm not going to confront anyone. She'll say I misunderstood. I believe you. Sadie's grip loosened. Relief crossed her face, but it was followed almost immediately by fear. She had expected to be questioned before she was believed. The laundry room was empty when I returned. Beneath the counter sat a gray records box secured with 2 plastic bands. Box 14 had been written across the lid in black marker. I did not cut the bands or lift the lid. A narrow gap along one side, exposed the upper edges of several folders. I crouched and used the light from my phone without touching the contents. The visible tabs carried names I recognized from Cedar Ridge: Harold Benson, June Wallace, Martin and Elise Harlan. All of them had been clients of Whitmore Memorial Services. At least 2 had died years earlier. I photographed the box from every side, then returned upstairs with the badge, key, envelope, and instruction sheet. I took clear pictures of each item and uploaded them to my private cloud account. Then I forwarded the images to Claire Benson, an old college friend who practiced consumer protection law. My message contained only 6 words. "Call me when you wake up. Urgent." Sadie's phone vibrated on the mattress. A message from Nicole appeared on the screen. "Do not be late tomorrow." Before Sadie could respond, another message arrived. "And do not open the box before 9. I photographed both messages and told Sadie not to answer. I did not try the temporary password, and I did not search for the customer names online. Whatever Nicole and Margaret had arranged, I would not give them away to claim that Sadie or I had accessed something improperly. "What are we going to do?" Sadie asked. I looked at her unpacked clothes, then at the red sweater she had folded away because my mother had convinced her there would be no place for her in the photographs. "First, I'm getting you out of this house," I said. "Then we'll find out why they needed you inside that building." I read the instruction sheet one final time. At the bottom, beneath the steps I had already seen, was a sentence printed in bold capital letters. "Close. Batch 14. At exactly 9 a.m. Do not leave the building until release is confirmed." I read the final instruction 3 times. "Close batch 14 at exactly 9. Do not leave until release is confirmed." Whatever release meant, it did not sound like ordinary filing, and it did not belong in the hands of a 17-year-old whose job had ended 4 months earlier. The clock on the nightstand read 3:43 a.m. I called Claire Benson. She answered on the 5th ring with the strained voice of someone pulled from deep sleep. "Audrey, what happened?" I told her only what I knew. My mother had excluded Sadie from the trip. Nicole had reactivated a work account, issued a new badge valid for 3 days, and instructed Sadie to enter a locked funeral home on Christmas Eve to process box 14 at exactly 9. I sent Claire the photographs while we spoke. Her voice changed as soon as she saw the instruction sheet. "Do not open that box. Do not use the username or password. Do not test the badge. And do not delete anything Nicole sent. I already photographed it all." "Good. Keep the original messages on Sadie's phone. Send me screenshots, but do not respond. I'm downloading copies now." I looked across the room. Sadie sat on the bed with both hands wrapped around her knees, watching my face for signs that she had done something wrong. "Claire, am I overreacting? You heard your mother tell your daughter she was not family. That alone is enough to take her out of that house. The rest means you should do it before anyone knows you are awake." Claire could not tell me what box 14 contained, and she refused to guess. She said the word "release" might be harmless, but the timing, temporary credentials, and insistence that Sadie work alone were serious enough to preserve. She asked me to forward every confirmation showing I had booked the trip myself. That was when I understood what I had to do. All 5 airline tickets had been purchased through my account and charged to my card. The hotel reservation was also in my name. I had booked 2 standard rooms and a suite because Margaret had complained that Leonard needed more space. I had reserved a private airport van so no one would have to manage luggage in the snow. I opened the airline app. My thumb hovered above the cancellation button. $20,000 represented 2 years of saying no to myself. It was skipped weekends, an older car, lunches packed before dawn, and the extra shifts I had taken when a supervisor went on leave. Even with travel protection, I would lose part of the money and receive much of the rest as credits instead of cash. For a moment, I heard Margaret's voice telling Sadie not to upset me because I had spent too much to cancel. She had calculated my sacrifice and decided it would make me obedient. I canceled all 5 tickets. The confirmation appeared on the screen, followed by the exact amount I had lost. I felt sick, but I did not stop. I canceled both hotel rooms, the suite, and the airport transfer. Each cancellation produced another email. Each one closed a door my family had assumed I would pay to hold open. Then I searched for 2 seats on another airline. A flight to San Diego was leaving earlier than our original one. The fare was higher, the seats were near the back, and we would have a connection, but I booked it before I could reconsider. Sadie stared at the new boarding passes on my phone. You canceled theirs? I canceled the trip I paid for. They're going to blame me. I'm not canceling because of you. I sat beside her and made sure she looked at me. I'm canceling because no one gets to use my money to leave you behind. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. What if the thing at the funeral home really is just paperwork? Then they can do it themselves. What if Grandma never speaks to us again? The question was not dramatic. Sadie asked it quietly, as if she were calculating the price of being protected. I hope she makes a better choice, I said. But I will not leave you here to make it easier for her to love me. We packed only what we could carry. I left the larger suitcases closed, because opening doors and dragging luggage through the house might wake someone. Sadie put the red sweater back on. I placed the badge, key, password envelope, and instruction sheet together on the guest room desk after photographing them again. Box 14 remained sealed beneath the laundry room counter. Before we left, I stood in Margaret's kitchen and wrote a letter on the back of the printed itinerary I had spent weeks perfecting. Sadie will not be staying behind. She will not open box 14, use the account created in her name, or enter the funeral home at 9 o'clock. I photographed everything you gave her, and copies are now outside this family. Every ticket, room, and airport transfer I paid for has been canceled. You said this trip was for real family only. I finally understood what that meant. I left the letter in the center of the counter where Margaret kept her clipboard. The house was silent when we stepped outside. Snow had covered the driveway in a thin white layer, and our footprints were the first marks across it. Sadie looked back once before getting into the car. I did not. We reached Minneapolis-St. Paul while the sky was still black. At security, Sadie kept checking her phone even though no one had called yet. I knew that silence would end the moment Margaret entered the kitchen. It happened at 5:47. My phone vibrated while we were walking toward gate C12. Margaret called first, then Leonard, then Nicole. I let each call go to voicemail. Messages arrived so quickly that the screen barely stopped moving. Nicole wrote that the airline had made a mistake. Leonard asked for the new confirmation numbers. Margaret ordered me to answer immediately. None of them asked whether Sadie was safe. At 6:03, Nicole sent one message in capital letters. Where is Sadie? By the time we sat at the gate, I had 38 missed calls. Sadie leaned against my shoulder, exhausted. I muted the phone but continued saving every voicemail to a separate folder, as Claire had instructed. Nicole called again. This time I answered. Her scream was so loud that a man across the aisle looked up from his coffee. How could you do this to your own family? I lowered the volume and kept my voice steady. You told my daughter she was not part of that family. That is not what Mom meant. We can discuss this later. Send me the airline information now. The reservations are canceled. You had no right. I paid for them. Nicole began speaking over me, accusing me of humiliating Leonard and wasting everyone's time. Behind her, I heard Margaret demanding the phone. When my mother came on the line, she did not ask about the tickets, the hotel, or the money. Audrey, listen to me. Did Sadie open box 14? No. Did you? No. Her breathing changed. Where is it? Where you left it. Nicole said something too low for me to hear. Margaret covered the receiver, but not completely. Their voices became sharp and hurried. Then Nicole's whisper came through clearly. That batch had to close at 9. I looked down at Sadie. Her eyes were open now. What happens at 9? I asked. Neither of them answered. Margaret recovered first. You have no idea what you are interfering with. Bring Sadie back before this becomes worse. The threat in her voice was wrapped in the same calm she had used in the laundry room. I felt the old reflex to explain myself, to persuade her that I was reasonable, but there was nothing left to discuss. Do not contact Sadie directly, I said. Claire Benson has copies of everything. I ended the call and saved the recording. For several minutes, I wondered whether I had moved too fast. Maybe release referred to archived pages. Maybe the rigid instructions came from an outdated computer system. Maybe I had destroyed Christmas over my mother's cruelty and an office procedure I did not understand. Sadie's phone chimed. She opened the notification and handed it to me without speaking. The message had been sent automatically from the Whitmore Memorial Services system to the temporary work account Nicole had created. The subject line read, "System process failure." Below it, in bold letters, were the words that ended every doubt I still had. Batch 14 failed to close. Pre-need refund release suspended. I had not only canceled a vacation. Once we boarded, the noise stopped. For the first time since leaving my mother's house, no one could reach us. The cabin lights dimmed, the engines rose beneath our feet, and Minneapolis disappeared under a layer of cloud. My phone was in airplane mode, but the screen still held the evidence of the morning. Missed calls, saved voicemails, cancellation notices, and the automated message from Whitmore Memorial Services. Batch 14 failed to close. Pre-need refund release suspended. Sadie sat beside me with her hands tucked under her thighs. She had read the message several times, but she had not asked what it meant. I suspected she was afraid the answer would somehow make the whole thing her fault. I turned the phone face down. You didn't release anything, but I was supposed to. You were supposed to follow instructions you had no reason to distrust. She looked toward the window. Would anyone believe that? I wanted to promise her they would. Instead, I told her the truth. We're going to make sure they have more than our word. The flight gave me too much time to think. I kept returning to the same details. The 3-day badge, the exact time, the locked building, and Nicole's panic when the batch failed. None of it felt accidental, but I still did not understand what a pre-need refund was or why a funeral home would need Sadie to release one on Christmas Eve. When we landed in San Diego, the afternoon sun felt wrong against the cold fear I had carried from Minnesota. Families moved through the terminal in holiday clothes, children dragging stuffed animals behind them, while Sadie and I stood near baggage claim, with only 2 carry-on bags, and no idea whether we would spend the night in a hotel or turn around and fly home. Claire called before I could contact her. I spoke to someone at the state, she said. Pre-need contracts are funeral arrangements customers pay for in advance. The money is supposed to be protected until services are provided or the contract is legally canceled. So a refund release sends the money back to the customer? In a legitimate cancellation, yes. But it should not be processed by a temporary archive assistant, and it should not require a 17-year-old to enter a closed building alone. Claire had forwarded the information to Dana Walsh, a compliance examiner who oversaw prepaid funeral funds. She warned me that Dana would not make accusations from photographs and voicemail alone. She would ask narrow questions, verify the system, and determine whether there was enough reason to intervene before 9 o'clock in Minnesota. Dana called 11 minutes later. Her voice was calm and precise. I am not telling you a crime has occurred, she began. I am trying to determine whether funds are at risk and whether a minor's credentials are being used outside their authorized scope. She asked me to send the instruction sheet, Nicole's messages, the automated failure email, and proof of when Sadie's summer employment ended. She also wanted to know exactly what Sadie had been allowed to do while employed. Sadie answered most of that herself. During the summer, she had scanned paper contracts, checked page counts, and assigned file names from a list Nicole provided. Her account had allowed her to upload documents and mark an archive folder complete. It had never allowed her to approve payments, alter customer balances, or release money. Dana asked whether anything unusual had happened during those months. Sadie hesitated. I don't know what counts as unusual. Anything Nicole told you not to question? Dana said. Sadie looked at me before continuing. She remembered cancellation forms that had blank signature lines. Nicole sometimes gave her a signed page separately and told her to attach it to a different document before scanning. On several occasions, Sadie had been instructed to rename a new file so it matched the number of an older contract already in the archive. I asked whether that would replace the first file. Sadie said. Nicole told me the old one was wrong and not to worry about it. Did you read the forms? Not really. She said they were paperwork for people who were already dead. The sentence made my stomach tighten. I remembered the names visible through the gap in box 14. Harold Benson had died 6 years earlier. June Wallace's funeral had been held at Whitmore Memorial Services when Sadie was still in middle school. Martin and Elise Harlan had both passed away before the pandemic. I gave Dana the names I could remember. She did not react beyond asking me to spell them. Then she said she would contact the funeral home's bank and system provider through the state's inspection authority. She could request a temporary hold on unusual refund activity, while verifying whether the contracts had been legally canceled. What happens if this is nothing? I asked. Then the hold is released after review. For now, do not contact customers, do not access the funeral home system, and do not publish any allegations. I agreed. Part of me wanted to call every family whose name I had seen and warn them, but Claire reinforced Dana's instruction. If the documents were legitimate, public accusations could cause unnecessary harm. If they were fraudulent, alerting the wrong person might cause records to disappear. We checked into a small airport hotel, instead of the resort I had originally booked. Sadie sat on one bed while I opened my laptop at the desk. She looked exhausted, but every time her phone vibrated, her shoulders tightened. At 2:18 p.m. California time, Dana called again. The bank had placed a temporary hold on 27 refund requests connected to Whitmore Memorial Services. Together, they totaled $347,600. I gripped the edge of the desk. Were they all in box 14? The digital batch associated with the failure notice contains 27 requests. I cannot yet confirm the physical contents of the box. She explained what the preliminary records showed. Sadie's reactivated account had been assigned as the user importing the documents. At 11:32 the previous night, someone with administrative authority had expanded that account's permissions. Sadie's temporary badge was scheduled to be the only active entry credential for the lower records floor between 8:30 and 10 on Christmas Eve. The security camera, covering that floor, had also been placed on a maintenance schedule for the same period. I looked at my daughter. Her face had gone pale. If I had gone in, she said, everything would have shown it was me. Dana corrected her carefully. It would have shown that your credentials and badge were used. That is not the same as proving you created the documents or intended to release funds. But they would have said I did. None of us answered because we all understood that possibility. The calls from my family continued. Leonard left messages, asking me to stop embarrassing Margaret. My mother said nothing about box 14, only that I had become cruel and irrational. Nicole called from a different number after I blocked hers. I answered, because Claire had told me to preserve direct communications. You have no idea what you've done, Nicole said. 42 people depend on that funeral home. 42 families could lose their income because you heard one sentence and decided to punish everyone. You reactivated Sadie's account. It was year-end cleanup. You gave her access to a closed building and told her to release refunds. I told her to close an archive batch. You are twisting words because you want Mom to suffer. Nicole spoke quickly, but beneath the anger I heard fear. She never asked whether Sadie was safe. She asked what I had sent Claire, whether I had photographed the box, and whether Dana had contacted the bank. By then, Nicole seemed less like my spoiled younger sister, and more like the person who had designed the trap. After the call, I asked Sadie whether Nicole had ever discussed college costs with her. Sadie said Nicole had asked how much money she hoped to save before graduation and whether I could afford tuition without loans. At the time, Sadie had thought her aunt was taking an interest in her future. Before I could decide what that meant, Dana emailed Claire and me a preliminary transaction diagram. The 27 refunds were not scheduled to return directly to the contract holders. They were routed through several temporary accounts before reaching one central business account. Dana called moments later. "I need to ask you about the name on the receiving entity," she said. I opened the attachment. At the center of the diagram was a company I had never heard of, Parker Family Consulting LLC. Dana was silent long enough for me to read it twice. Then she asked, "Was Thomas Parker your father?" The company had been opened with his name and tax identification number nearly 20 years earlier. I had spent most of my life believing Thomas Parker was the reason my family had learned to distrust the Parker name. My mother told the story so often that it stopped sounding like an accusation and became family history. Thomas had handled financial records for Whitmore Memorial Services. Money disappeared from prepaid funeral accounts. When questions began, he blamed the system, humiliated Margaret in front of the community, and left Cedar Ridge rather than accept responsibility. According to her, he had chosen pride over his daughter. I was 22 when the investigation became public, old enough to understand words like embezzlement and professional misconduct, but still young enough to believe that the parent who stayed must be the honest one. Margaret sat beside me at the kitchen table and explained that Thomas had destroyed his own life. She said she had tried to protect me from the worst of it. I did not ask to see the records. I did not call him. Instead, I built my life around proving I was nothing like him. I paid every bill before it was due. I avoided borrowing money even when it would have made things easier. I kept receipts, balanced accounts, and returned every favor quickly so no one could say I owed them. At work, I became the person trusted with deadlines and difficult decisions. In my family, I volunteered to pay because generosity felt like evidence of innocence. Even the Christmas trip had been part of that pattern. I thought if I worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, and paid for everything myself, no one could question my place in the family. Now a business account carrying my father's name sat at the center of nearly $350,000 in suspended transfers. Dana asked whether I knew anything about Parker Family Consulting. "No," I said. "I've never heard of it." "Did your father own a consulting business?" "He was an accountant. He sometimes worked independently, but I don't know what names he used." Dana did not tell me what to believe. She only said the company had been registered in 2007, shortly before the original financial scandal at Whitmore Memorial Services. The tax identification number belonged to Thomas. Several old transfers had passed through it before the company became inactive. The new refund requests were set to use that same account structure. After the call ended, I stared at the transaction diagram until the words blurred. If Thomas had created the company, perhaps Margaret had been telling the truth. Perhaps Nicole had found an old scheme and reused it. Maybe I had taken Sadie away from a trap designed by my sister, only to discover that my father had built the first version. Sadie sat across from me on the other hotel bed. Was Grandpa really a thief? That's what the investigation said. That's what Grandma said. I closed the laptop harder than I intended. There were records, Sadie. He lost his license. People do not lose everything because one person tells a story. She flinched, and I immediately regretted my tone. "I'm sorry," I said. "None of this is your fault." "I know." She hesitated. "What if Grandpa didn't do it?" The question struck the part of me I had spent years sealing shut. If he was innocent, he could have stayed and fought. Maybe he did. "You didn't know him." "Neither did I," she said. "That's why I'm asking." I stood and walked to the window. Below us, cars moved through the hotel parking lot beneath palm trees, decorated with white Christmas lights. The calm outside made my anger feel misplaced, but I could not release it. Thomas had sent birthday cards for several years after he left. I returned the first one unopened. The others disappeared before I saw them, and Margaret said he had eventually stopped trying. When I was older, I told myself that a father who truly cared would have found another way. It was easier to blame him than admit I might have helped shut him out. My phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. Claire had advised me to preserve communications, so I recorded the call before answering. "You finally decided to speak to me," Margaret said. "What is Parker Family Consulting?" Silence held for less than a second, but I noticed it. "Your father's company. Why were refunds from Whitmore Memorial Services scheduled to pass through it yesterday?" I have no idea what Nicole has done with those old accounts. It was the first time Margaret had placed distance between herself and Nicole. Sadie's credentials were set to release the transfers. Then perhaps you should ask yourself why your daughter had access to financial records. She didn't until someone expanded her permissions. Margaret exhaled slowly. "You and Sadie are exactly like him." My grip tightened around the phone. "Like who?" "Thomas. Suspicious, ungrateful, always searching for corruption where there is none. You see theft everywhere because it is in your blood." For years, that sentence would have silenced me. The Parker name had always been treated as a stain I had to compensate for. Now Margaret was applying the same stain to my daughter before any investigation had begun. If nothing improper happened, why did Box 14 have to close while the rest of you were flying to California? You do not understand business. Then explain it. I will not discuss confidential customer matters with someone who has already involved outsiders. She moved immediately to consequences. 42 employees could lose their jobs. Families with funerals scheduled that week might be abandoned. Cedar Ridge depended on Whitmore Memorial Services. She said my anger over a private conversation had already caused panic at the bank. "You are punishing an entire town because you misunderstood your place in this family," she said. "My daughter's place was alone in your house, while her name appeared on a refund release. You are being dramatic. Did you prepare Box 14? Margaret did not answer. "Did you create the temporary badge?" Another silence. "Did you know Sadie's account had been reactivated? You need to think about the damage you are causing." She never denied the box, the badge, the account, or the release. She only described what would happen if people examined them. I ended the call before she could turn another threat into a duty I was expected to accept. Claire contacted me an hour later. She had located the disciplinary record from Thomas's accounting board review. The final report stated that he had used his credentials to alter customer balances and direct funds through Parker Family Consulting. It cited login histories, internal spreadsheets, and testimony from Whitmore management. "There's a problem," Claire said. "What kind of problem?" The report references Technical Appendix C 7 times, but Appendix C is missing from the archived case file. What was supposed to be in it? The raw access logs and the method used to establish the timestamps. Without that appendix, the report showed conclusions, but not the complete technical evidence supporting them. Claire had requested copies from the accounting board, the county archive, and the insurer that had handled the original claim. Dana found one first. An insurance examiner had preserved a duplicate because the missing money had triggered a coverage dispute. The scanned copy was faint, and several pages were handwritten, but the dates were clear. The crucial changes to the Whitmore accounts had been recorded on the 18th of February, 2008. I remembered that date only after Dana read the hospital name. Thomas had been admitted the previous evening following a highway collision. He suffered a broken wrist, fractured ribs, and a concussion. Hospital records showed he remained under observation for 3 days. Claire continued reading. An administrative login entered the system after the original activity, adjusted the server clock, and reassigned several actions to Thomas's user profile. The report did not identify the administrator, only that the account belonged to Whitmore Memorial Services Management. Margaret had taught me that Thomas fled because the evidence against him was undeniable. The evidence now showed someone had changed the time and placed his name on actions performed while he lay injured in a hospital bed. Claire reached the final line of the appendix and read it slowly. The user attributed to Thomas Parker was physically incapable of accessing the system at the recorded time. Claire confirmed the preservation order the next morning. Whitmore Memorial Services, its bank, and the software provider were formally instructed not to delete, alter, or overwrite records connected to Box 14, Sadie's temporary account, or the suspended refund requests. Only then did I agree to return to Cedar Ridge. Sadie and I flew back through Minneapolis and checked into a hotel 20 minutes from home. I would not take her to Margaret's house, and I did not want my family waiting in our driveway while I tried to understand what had happened to my father. Our house was dark when Claire met us there. Snow had collected along the front steps, untouched since we left. Sadie remained in the living room while Claire followed me upstairs. The letter from Thomas had been inside a locked drawer for 6 years. It arrived after his death in 2019, forwarded by the attorney handling his few remaining possessions. I remembered holding the envelope and seeing his handwriting across the front. Margaret had been with me that afternoon. She said Thomas had probably written another version of the same excuses he had used his entire life. I placed the letter in the drawer unopened. Now Claire stood beside my desk while I took it out. She photographed the sealed envelope, recorded the date and condition, and watched as I opened it. We both understood the letter might guide us toward evidence, but it could not prove every claim simply because a dead man had written it. The first line was addressed to me. Audrey, I do not expect you to believe this, but I need you to know where to look if you ever decide to ask what happened. I sat down before reading further. Thomas wrote that he had reviewed prepaid funeral accounts for Whitmore Memorial Services in 2007. At first, the discrepancies looked like bookkeeping errors. Several customers had supposedly canceled their contracts, but the refunds did not return to them or their estates. The money moved through temporary accounts and disappeared into operating expenses. When Thomas questioned Margaret, she told him the funeral home was short on cash. Business had slowed, insurance reimbursements were late, and payroll was approaching. She called the transfers temporary loans and asked him to sign a year-end reconciliation, stating that every refund had been properly issued. She told him signing would save jobs. He refused. According to the letter, Margaret warned him that a public investigation would close the funeral home and destroy Leonard's family name. Thomas answered that the customers had trusted them with money intended for their deaths. Using their grief as a credit line was not a business solution. Weeks later, Parker Family Consulting appeared in the records. Thomas wrote that he had never created the company. Someone used a copy of his tax documents, his professional information, and a scanned version of his signature to register it. By the time he discovered the account, refund transfers were already passing through it. He began collecting copies of statements and access reports. The night before his car accident, he called Margaret and said he intended to report everything. After he left the hospital, the records had changed. The final pages contained dates, storage locations, and names. An insurance examiner named Paul Dyer had received copies of the original access logs. Ruth Calder, the funeral home's former bookkeeper, had seen Margaret remove files from Thomas's temporary office. A county attorney had drafted a statement Thomas never signed. The letter did not ask me to forgive him. It described his attempts to see me. He wrote that he came to Margaret's house twice after the investigation began. The first time, Leonard told him I was not home. The second time, Margaret met him outside and said I wanted nothing to do with him. She claimed I had called him a thief and begged her to keep him away. I had never said those words to her. Thomas wrote letters, but most were returned. He called my college dorm until someone told him my number had changed. Margaret later told me he had stopped trying because avoiding responsibility mattered more to him than being my father. I pressed my palm against my mouth as I read the final paragraph. I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because every attempt to reach you was used as proof that I was dangerous, unstable, or trying to manipulate you. I hoped time would make the truth easier to find. Instead, time only made the lie older. Sadie appeared in the doorway. She did not ask what the letter said. She crossed the room and sat beside me. For years, I had resented Thomas for not fighting harder. Now I had evidence that he had tried, while I had helped my mother close every door. Claire reminded me that grief could wait until we had secured the locations mentioned in the letter. She sent the dates and names to Dana, who compared them with records already obtained under the preservation order. By that evening, the current audit trail was becoming clearer. Nicole's administrator account had reactivated Sadie's credentials and expanded her permissions. Nicole had also scheduled the camera maintenance and prepared the digital container linked to Box 14. At first, nearly everything pointed toward her. Dana found large credit card balances, a second mortgage Nicole had not disclosed to Leonard, and monthly spending far beyond her salary. There were luxury purchases, private club fees, and payments on a vehicle registered through a small company she controlled. Nicole had prepared the physical box, sent Sadie the instructions, and monitored the failed batch. It looked as though she had discovered Margaret's old fraud system and revived it to cover her debts. But Dana found 2 records that did not fit that conclusion. The refund forms inside the digital batch had been generated from a template created by Margaret's management account. The bank's standing authorization allowing refund funds to pass through intermediary business accounts carried Leonard's signature. Dana did not yet know how much Leonard understood. A broad authorization could have been signed without reviewing each later transaction. Claire warned me not to turn suspicion into certainty before the documents were examined. Margaret's role was less ambiguous. The template carried her account identification, but Nicole could argue she had used her mother's login. The investigation was still separating who created the system from who operated it. Nicole contacted me that night from an unfamiliar number. "Do not hang up," she said. "I'm trying to help you. You prepared Box 14. I followed instructions." "Whose instructions?" She ignored the question. Mom controlled the accounts. She created the forms. She told me the business would collapse if we did not move the money until spring. You gave Sadie the badge. I never expected her to be charged with anything. You created evidence that she entered the building, used the account, and released the money. Nicole's breathing became uneven. "I can put the money back. It is not your money to put back. I will sell the car. I will refinance my house. I will do whatever is necessary. But you need to stop saying Sadie was targeted. That is exactly what happened. If you make that accusation official, they will treat this as identity fraud involving a minor. Mom will go to prison, and the funeral home will be finished." Nicole offered a deal. She would tell investigators Margaret designed the refund system. She would return what she could and provide passwords. In exchange, I would withdraw my statement that Sadie had been deliberately positioned as the responsible person. "You want me to protect you by leaving my daughter exposed. No one is blaming Sadie now, because I took her away." Nicole insisted everything could be handled privately. I asked her to put the offer in writing through her attorney. She refused. I told her I would not trade Sadie's name for another family arrangement no one could prove existed. Nicole began crying, but the sound turned quickly into anger. "You think you are the first person Mom has cornered like this?" I stopped speaking. Nicole lowered her voice. "Mom did this before. What are you talking about? Ask her what happened the night your father tried to take you away." The call ended before I could respond. I called back, but the number no longer accepted incoming calls. 10 minutes later, a voicemail arrived from Nicole's regular phone. Her voice was quieter, as if she had recorded it somewhere Margaret could not hear. "Your father didn't leave because he stole. He left because Mom made sure no one would believe him." Nicole's voicemail did not tell me everything, but it changed the question I had been asking. I no longer wondered whether my mother had protected the person who framed Thomas. I began to wonder how much of the framing she had designed herself. Claire warned me not to confront Margaret yet. The current audit was still separating documents from assumptions, and Nicole's frightened confession could not replace evidence. Instead, Claire arranged for me to meet Ruth Calder, the former bookkeeper Thomas had named in his letter. Ruth was 72 and lived in a small apartment above a pharmacy on the edge of Cedar Ridge. She chose a quiet diner for our meeting and arrived carrying a canvas folder that looked older than Sadie. Her hands trembled when she saw me, but her voice remained steady. "You have your father's eyes," she said. That made it harder to watch what they did to him. Ruth had worked at Whitmore Memorial Services for 17 years. She remembered Thomas noticing that prepaid funeral funds were leaving customer accounts without matching checks to the customers or their estates. At first, he assumed the office had posted them incorrectly. When he traced the money through temporary accounts, he began asking Margaret for original cancellation forms. "Your mother told the staff he was desperate," Ruth said. "She said he had gambling debts and was trying to cover them by accusing the funeral home." "Did anyone ever see evidence of those debts?" Ruth shook her head. "No, but Margaret repeated it until people remembered hearing it as if they had seen proof." Leonard knew Thomas had raised concerns, but he refused to challenge Margaret publicly. He told Ruth that an investigation could suspend the funeral home's license, cancel scheduled services, and cost dozens of employees their jobs. He said silence was the responsible choice, until the family could settle the matter privately. The matter was never settled. It was placed in Thomas's name. Ruth also remembered the night Nicole had mentioned. After leaving the hospital, Thomas came to the Whitmore house with copies of account records and asked to take me somewhere safe while he challenged the allegations. Margaret sought an emergency order that same night, claiming his financial crimes and erratic behavior made him a danger to me. The accusations were still unproven, but the order prevented him from taking me until a hearing could be held. By the time the hearing arrived, the altered access logs had been submitted. Thomas had lost his license, his credibility, and his chance to convince a judge that Margaret was using me to silence him. I remembered the birthday cards I had returned and the calls I refused to take. Thomas had been trying to reach me from inside, a story Margaret had already taught me to believe. I could not repair the years I had lost, but I could stop the same story from swallowing Sadie. Dana met Claire and me later that afternoon and laid out the current scheme in a sequence simple enough that none of us could mistake its purpose. Nicole had reactivated Sadie's account and expanded its permissions. Margaret's administrator profile had generated 27 false cancellation forms. The physical copies were placed inside Box 14, already arranged for scanning. Sadie's assigned task was the final visible step. She would enter the funeral home with the temporary badge, scan the forms, and select Finalize Archive Batch. That command would attach the documents to 27 prepaid contracts and release refund requests that had already been prepared in the system. The records room camera was scheduled to be offline. No other employee badge was supposed to enter that floor. The audit log would show Sadie's username importing the forms, while the access system would show her badge inside the building at the exact time the refund release occurred. The money would not have moved because she understood what she was doing, Dana said. It would have moved because someone built a process in which one ordinary archive command activated work already completed behind the screen. Sadie sat beside me during the explanation. Then they would say I created the forms. They would have evidence designed to suggest it, Claire answered. That is why preserving the messages and keeping you out of the building mattered. Dana had also found the motive they intended to attach to Sadie. During the summer, Sadie had asked Nicole whether Whitmore Memorial Services offered college assistance to temporary employees. She had also let Nicole review a scholarship essay, describing how worried she was about tuition and how hard I had worked to support us. Nicole still had a copy of that essay as her company email. My daughter stared at the table. She told me the essay made me sound responsible. She was collecting a reason, I said. Sadie's expression tightened. Everyone will believe her. She runs the funeral home. I'm just the girl who had the password. You are also the girl who never entered the building, never opened the box, and never touched the account that morning, I told her. Their plan required your silence. You do not owe them that anymore. The 27 contracts in Box 14 were only the newest group. As examiners compared old refund activity with bank records, they found at least 31 families affected over several years. Some involved people who had already died. Others belonged to customers who were still alive and believed their funerals were fully paid. One couple had spent 12 years making monthly payments so their children would not inherit burial expenses. Their account now contained less than a quarter of what they had deposited. The investigation was no longer only about what my family had intended to do to Sadie. It was about people who had trusted the Whitmore name during the most vulnerable decisions of their lives. Margaret responded by publishing her own version first. Her social media post described me as an estranged daughter who canceled a family Christmas trip without warning, removed a minor from Minnesota, and shared confidential business information because of a private disagreement. She claimed Sadie had accessed restricted records and called her an emotionally unstable teenager, being encouraged to retaliate against relatives. She did not mention the temporary badge, the reactivated account, or the 27 suspended refunds. The post spread through Cedar Ridge within hours. Some people defended Margaret because Whitmore Memorial Services had buried their parents and grandparents. Several employees wrote that they were afraid of losing their jobs. Others asked why a closed funeral home needed a teenager working alone on Christmas Eve. Sadie read only a few comments before putting down her phone. She made me sound dangerous. I wanted to answer every accusation, but Claire stopped me. Public anger could not be allowed to dictate the evidence. She issued one short statement on our behalf, confirming that Sadie had not entered Whitmore Memorial Services on December 24, had not accessed its system that morning, and was cooperating through counsel with the proper authorities. We offered no further public argument. For the first time, I did not beg my mother to understand me or explain why I had made the responsible choice. I let the records answer her. That evening, Dana called with one final discovery. The bank had recovered the internal description attached to the transfer that batch 14 was supposed to trigger. The words had been entered before Sadie ever received the badge. The memo read, S. Parker Education Advance. They had not merely prepared to put the theft in my daughter's name. They had prepared the reason everyone was supposed to believe she did it. The words S. Parker Education Advance removed the last possibility that Sadie had simply been placed in the wrong position by carelessness. Someone had written her motive before she entered the building, before she used the temporary password, and before a single dollar moved. They had prepared not only the evidence against her, but also the story people were supposed to tell about why she had done it. Claire arranged the meeting at her office 2 days later. She refused Margaret's request to meet privately at the Whitmore house, where every conversation could be turned into a family dispute. Claire's conference room had a long table, a recording system, and windows overlooking a frozen parking lot. Dana Walsh attended with another representative from the State Compliance Division. Margaret, Nicole, and Leonard each arrived with legal counsel. Sadie did not come. I would not make her sit across from the people who had prepared to put a theft in her name. She remained at the hotel with one of Claire's assistants, and knew I would tell her only what she needed to hear. Margaret entered wearing the dark navy suit she used for charity luncheons and difficult funerals. She looked tired but composed. Leonard kept his eyes on the table. Nicole stared at me, as if I had personally created every document the investigators had recovered. Before anyone formally began, she leaned forward and said, "How could you do this to your own family?" The sentence sounded different in that room. On Christmas Eve, it had been a scream about canceled tickets. Now it was an accusation made while lawyers sat beside evidence showing what they had planned for my daughter. I took Sadie away from a building where you intended to put nearly $350,000 in her name, I said. That is what I did. Nicole's attorney touched her arm, but she pulled away. You have destroyed the funeral home before anyone has proven money was stolen. Dana corrected her without raising her voice. The funds were suspended before release. The investigation concerns the preparation and attempted processing of fraudulent refund requests, as well as prior transactions. Claire placed 4 documents in front of me. We had agreed that I would ask only questions supported by records already collected. I would not speculate, threaten, or give Margaret another opportunity to pretend this was emotional revenge. I looked at Nicole first. Why was Sadie's badge valid for only December 24 through December 26? Nicole glanced at her attorney. She was completing temporary year-end work. Why was her archive account upgraded to allow her to finalize a refund-linked badge? I did not understand every permission in the software. You were the administrator who selected them. My mother told me what access was needed. Margaret did not turn toward Nicole, but the muscles in her jaw tightened. I moved to the next document. Why was the camera outside the lower records room scheduled for maintenance during the exact period Sadie was told to enter? Nicole folded her arms. The camera had been malfunctioning. The service company found no repair request. The maintenance setting was entered from your account the night before the trip. Nicole's confidence faltered. Mom said the cameras needed to be offline while old customer files were being scanned. This time Margaret looked at her. I placed the transaction memo on the table. Why did the transfer say, S. Parker Education Advance? Nicole's face lost color. I never wrote that. The system records show it was entered before Sadie received her badge. I said I did not write it. Nicole turned toward Margaret. She prepared the refund templates. She told me the labels would make the internal accounts easier to reconcile. Margaret's attorney asked for a break. Margaret refused. There is no reason to dramatize ordinary business decisions, she said. Whitmore Memorial Services experienced a temporary cash shortage. Insurance payments were delayed, operating costs increased, and payroll still had to be met. Dana asked, "Are you acknowledging that prepaid customer funds were redirected to business expenses?" I am saying money was moved temporarily to protect the institution responsible for serving those customers. The contracts did not authorize those transfers. Contracts do not employ 42 people. Margaret turned to me as if Dana and the lawyers no longer mattered. If the funeral home closes 42, employees lose their income. Families with services already scheduled will have nowhere to go. Bodies cannot be placed on hold while regulators debate paperwork. The argument was familiar because she had used it against Thomas. Every stolen dollar became a saved job. Every false document became an act of responsibility. Anyone who objected was not defending customers, but endangering the community. You did not borrow the money, I said. You took it from people who trusted you while they were planning their deaths. Then you prepared to make a 17-year-old look responsible. No one intended to hurt Sadie. You created a financial motive using her college plans. That description was an accounting label. You activated her badge, expanded her account, disabled the camera, and made her the only person scheduled to enter the building. She only had to follow the instructions. Margaret said it as if obedience would have protected Sadie. As if my daughter could have clicked the button, released the money, and walked away untouched because she had not understood the machinery behind it. She would have been questioned, I said. Her name would have appeared on the audit log. Her badge would have placed her in the building. Her scholarship essay would have been used to say she needed money. The system would have been corrected before anything became serious. Then why did the rest of you need to be in California? Margaret's gaze hardened. The trip was planned months ago. The trip I planned and paid for. That does not make you an expert in the obligations of a family business. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life deciding which burdens belonged to a Parker and which protections belonged to a Whitmore. Why Sadie? Margaret did not answer immediately. Nicole shifted in her chair. Leonard stared at his hands. I asked again. If this was only a temporary transfer to protect employees, why did someone need to carry the blame? Why did it have to be my daughter? The sorrow disappeared from Margaret's face. Her shoulders straightened, and the controlled softness left her voice. Someone had to carry it. No one in the room moved. Margaret looked directly at me. Better a Parker than a Whitmore. I had imagined that if my mother ever admitted what she believed, I would cry, shout, or ask how she could say such a thing about her granddaughter. Instead, something inside me became still. I no longer needed to persuade her that Sadie was worthy of protection. Margaret understood Sadie was innocent. She had chosen her for that reason. Nicole slowly turned toward our mother. For the first time, I saw fear in her expression that was not about prison or money. She had spent her life believing being a Whitmore made her safe. Now she was sitting beside a woman who had just admitted that safety depended on always having someone else available to sacrifice. Dana closed the folder in front of her. Based on the transaction records, altered account permissions, attempted releases, and risks to existing contract holders, the state is issuing an immediate temporary suspension of Whitmore Memorial Services Authority to manage prepaid funeral funds. Margaret's attorney objected, but Dana continued. All pending transfers would remain frozen. An independent custodian would take control of customer records and verify active contracts. The funeral home could continue only limited services under external supervision while the investigation proceeded. Leonard finally spoke. I did not know any of this was happening. I turned toward him. Your signature authorized the intermediary accounts. Margaret handled the finances. I signed what she put in front of me. You said the same thing when Thomas raised concerns in 2008. His eyes lifted to mine. You stood beside her while she called him a thief, I continued. You signed the papers that kept him away from me. You protected the Whitmore name because knowing less made you feel less responsible. I never altered his records. But you knew something was wrong. Leonard looked at Margaret. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. He noticed it, and whatever loyalty had kept him silent for 18 years finally broke. He asked his attorney for permission to retrieve something from his car. The attorney insisted on accompanying him. They returned with a brown leather folder. Leonard placed it on the table but kept one hand over it. This has been in the safe at our house since 2008. Inside was a draft settlement offered to Thomas after the altered records had been submitted. Margaret had proposed paying him enough to leave Cedar Ridge and rebuild somewhere else. In return, he would accept responsibility for the missing funds, surrender any claim against Whitmore Memorial Services, and agree not to contact me without her permission. Thomas had never signed it. In the margin beside the payment amount was a note written in Margaret's handwriting. Necessary per protect the Whitmore name. Leonard pushed the document toward me. Your mother knew Thomas was innocent before he ever left town. Leonard's folder did not end the case. It ended the family's ability to pretend there was no case. The investigation continued through winter, spring, and most of summer. Every few weeks, another document arrived through Claire's office. Account records, audit findings, licensing notices, sworn statements, and letters from lawyers who had once referred to the missing money as an internal bookkeeping dispute. The truth took months because it had been hidden for years. Dana's final audit separated responsibility carefully. Margaret had designed the refund system, maintained the intermediary accounts, and decided which prepaid contracts could be drained without drawing immediate attention. She had created the templates used in Box 14 and preserved the same method that had once placed the theft under Thomas Parker's name. Nicole had carried out the current attempt. She reactivated Sadie's account, expanded its permissions, prepared the physical files, scheduled the camera outage, and entered the false education memo. Investigators also found that part of the money, taken in earlier years, had covered Nicole's personal debts and luxury expenses. Leonard had not created the system, but his claim of ignorance did not survive the records. He had signed broad bank authorizations, ignored irregular reports, helped suppress Thomas's allegations, and kept the unsigned settlement in his safe for 18 years. He had protected the Whitmore name by refusing to ask questions whose answers might cost him the business. Thomas was finally cleared through evidence that supported itself from several directions. The missing technical appendix proved his account had been manipulated while he was hospitalized. Ruth's testimony confirmed he had challenged the transfers before he was accused. The draft settlement showed Margaret knew he was innocent. The historical bank records traced the money away from him and back toward accounts controlled by Whitmore Memorial Services. The State Accounting Board amended its old disciplinary finding. The notice arrived in a plain envelope addressed to Thomas Parker's estate. It stated that the conclusion against him had relied on altered technical records and materially false testimony. His professional record was corrected, and the finding of misconduct was withdrawn. He had been dead for 6 years. I sat at my kitchen table with the notice in front of me and tried to decide what justice meant when the person who needed it could no longer read his own name without the word thief beside it. I felt relief, grief, and shame in equal measure. None of it brought back the calls I had refused or the letters I had returned. Sadie placed her hand over mine. "He would have wanted you to know." I nodded, but I could not answer. Whitmore memorial services did not close overnight. Dana had warned me that sudden closure would harm the same customers the investigation was meant to protect. An independent funeral services group was appointed to manage active cases, preserve contracts, and transfer prepaid accounts into protected custody. Scheduled funerals continued. Families were not forced to move loved ones in the middle of arrangements. Many employees kept their jobs under the temporary operator, though the Whitmore family lost all management authority. That mattered to me more than I expected. During the first weeks, Margaret had used the employees as shields. She said exposing the fraud would destroy 42 livelihoods. The independent takeover proved the workers and the Whitmore name were not the same thing. The business could serve the community without allowing my mother to control the money. The restitution process was slower. Business property, the family's lake cottage, and part of Margaret and Leonard's home equity were placed under court supervision. The funds were used to create a repayment pool for customers whose prepaid funeral accounts had been reduced or emptied. I met several of those families through the victims coordinator. One woman named Denise had paid for her mother's funeral in monthly installments because she never wanted her children to face the debt she had carried after her father died. A retired teacher named Mr. Ellis believed his own burial had been fully funded. The audit showed that more than half of his account had been transferred years earlier. Neither of them cared about my family's Christmas trip. They cared that a respected funeral home had used their fear of becoming a burden as a source of cash. Listening to them changed the way I understood what had happened. Margaret had prepared to sacrifice Sadie, but Sadie was not the first vulnerable person she had used. The entire system depended on customers being too grieving, too elderly, or too trusting to examine every transaction. When I gave my formal statement, I did not focus on the hotel rooms or the canceled flights. I explained how adults had taken ordinary acts of trust and converted them into evidence against a child. Sadie had accepted a summer job, shared a scholarship essay, and followed instructions from relatives. Margaret and Nicole had turned each of those things into a badge, a financial motive, and an audit trail. I also spoke about reputation. Cedar Ridge believed the Whitmore family because they had buried generations of its residents. That respect made people less likely to question them, not more deserving of unquestioned trust. Before the criminal proceedings advanced, Margaret's attorney approached Claire with a private proposal. Margaret would issue a public apology for excluding Sadie from the trip. She would fund Sadie's college education in full and establish an additional trust for graduate school. In return, I would describe Box 14 as a misunderstanding caused by poor internal controls rather than a deliberate attempt to implicate my daughter. The offer included more money than I had saved in my entire life. For a few minutes, I understood why Margaret believed it might work. Money had always been the language she used when love, accountability, or truth became inconvenient. I rejected it. I did not ask for tuition, a trust, or a private apology. Through Claire, I demanded that every official record clearly state Sadie had not created, uploaded, or authorized the fraudulent requests. I required written notices to her school, the scholarship organizations that had received Margaret's accusations, and every agency that had reviewed her name during the investigation. I also demanded that no photograph, recording, statement, or image of Sadie be used in any public apology or attempt to rebuild the Whitmore reputation. Margaret wanted a video in which she apologized beside her granddaughter. Her attorney said it would show healing and reduce public hostility. Sadie refused. "I'm not standing next to her so people can tell her she looks forgiven," she said. "She can apologize without using me again." That was the clearest boundary my daughter had ever spoken. She did not raise her voice or ask me whether it was acceptable. She simply decided. Nicole eventually agreed to cooperate. She provided passwords, identified old accounts, and admitted creating Sadie's badge and changing her access permissions. Her cooperation could reduce her sentence, but it did not erase her role. For the first time, she could not hide behind Margaret's instructions and still call herself innocent. Leonard surrendered his professional license. Civil claims were filed against him for approving transactions and concealing information related to Thomas's case. He sent me one letter, saying silence had seemed like the least destructive choice. I returned it through his attorney without answering. By September, the court had accepted the major factual findings. Restitution calculations were underway, and sentencing dates had been scheduled. Margaret continued to describe herself as the person who had done what was necessary to preserve a family institution. The afternoon before her sentencing hearing, Claire's office received a personal envelope addressed to me. There was no return address, but I recognized Margaret's handwriting before Claire placed it on the table. Across the front, my mother had written 4 words. "To my real daughter." Even after everything, she was still using the same distinction that had wounded Sadie, hoping it would make me feel chosen enough to come back. I opened Margaret's letter in Claire's office after Sadie had gone home. I did not take it to the hotel, place it on our kitchen table, or ask my daughter whether she wanted to read what her grandmother had written. Margaret had already used Sadie's name, college plans, work history, and desire to belong as tools. She would not use my daughter's curiosity as one more way back into our lives. The letter began with the words, "I am sorry you were hurt. Not sorry for creating the refund templates. Not sorry for placing a temporary badge in Sadie's hand or preparing a financial motive in her name. Not sorry for choosing a child because she carried Parker instead of Whitmore." Margaret wrote that she had made difficult decisions during years when the funeral home was struggling. She repeated that 42 employees and hundreds of local families had depended on her. She said every action had been intended to preserve an institution larger than any one person. Then she called me her real daughter. She said Nicole had made reckless choices. Leonard had failed to understand the finances, and Thomas had forced the family into a public conflict that should have remained private. She admitted mistakes were made, but she never named who had made them. She described Box 14 as a desperate attempt to delay a financial collapse, not a plan designed to put theft in Sadie's name. The last page asked me to stand beside her after sentencing and help preserve what remained of the Whitmore name. Margaret was still asking for forgiveness without surrendering the story. She wanted me to accept the title of real daughter in exchange for helping her avoid the truth of what she had done to my real child. I did not write an emotional answer. I did not explain again why Sadie deserved protection or list every lie Margaret had told me about Thomas. Claire sent a response through counsel stating that Margaret was not to contact Sadie or me directly, use our names or images in any public statement, or send messages through relatives, employees, or members of the community. Any necessary communication would go through our attorneys. For the first time, silence was not something Margaret imposed on me. It was a boundary I chose. The criminal cases ended over the following months. Margaret pleaded guilty to fraud, falsifying financial records, and the unlawful use of another person's identifying information. Her plea acknowledged that Sadie's credentials had been prepared to create a false audit trail, although Margaret continued telling the court that she had never expected my daughter to face permanent harm. Nicole pleaded guilty as an accomplice. Her cooperation, passwords, and testimony reduced her sentence, but did not erase it. She admitted creating the badge, altering Sadie's permissions, disabling the camera, and entering the education memo. The judge made clear that following a parent's instructions did not excuse designing evidence against a minor. Leonard lost the funeral home, his professional license, and most of the property tied to the business. The court did not treat his refusal to understand as innocence. He had signed authorizations, concealed the settlement offered to Thomas, and spent years benefiting from questions he chose not to ask. The independent operator eventually purchased the service side of Whitmore Memorial Services. The Whitmore name came down from the building, but the employees who had done honest work were offered positions under the new company. The restitution fund began issuing payments to affected families in stages. It could not restore the trust they had lost, but it returned money that had never belonged to my family. A week after Thomas's professional record was formally corrected, I went to his grave. I brought the amended notice from the accounting board and the letter I had finally opened. His headstone was simple, with no mention of the career or reputation he had lost. Snow had settled inside the carved letters of his name. I did not tell him he had been a perfect father. I did not know enough to make him into one. He had been angry in some of his letters, and there were years when shame and defeat had made him retreat. Clearing his name did not turn every absence into Margaret's fault, but I admitted that I had believed the people who harmed him because their version allowed me to feel secure. I had confused the parent who remained physically close with the parent who told the truth. I read aloud one sentence from his final letter. "I hope you do not spend your life proving you deserve love from people who profit from making you doubt it." The wind moved through the bare trees. There was no answer, but I no longer needed one to know what I had to stop carrying. Sadie graduated from high school in June. Her name was cleared in every official record connected to the investigation, and the scholarship organizations that had received Margaret's accusations were sent written corrections. She applied to college without hiding the summer job or turning the fraud into the center of her application. She did not decide to become a lawyer, an auditor, or an investigator because of what happened. She chose environmental design, a subject she had loved before Box 14 existed. I was relieved that my family's crime did not get to choose her future. At graduation, Sadie wore the same red sweater beneath her gown that she had packed for the Christmas photographs. This time, she chose it because she liked it, not because she hoped Margaret would approve. The following Christmas, we took a smaller trip to a quiet town along the California coast. There was no sweet, private airport van or printed schedule. Claire joined us for 2 days, and a few friends met us for dinner, but most of the week belonged to Sadie and me. We ate breakfast when we were hungry, walked along the water, and changed plans without anyone treating flexibility as failure. No one asked who had paid enough to deserve a seat. No one arranged us by last name. On our final morning, Sadie balanced her phone against a railing and set the timer. We stood together as the horizon slowly brightened behind us. The photograph was imperfect. The wind pushed my hair across my face, and Sadie was laughing before the camera finished counting down. It was the first family photograph I kept without looking at the empty space where someone else should have been. We remained by the water after the sun began to rise. Sadie slipped her hands into the pockets of her jacket and looked at me. "Do you ever regret canceling that trip?" she asked. I thought about the money I had lost, the mother I no longer spoke to, the sister who had chosen the Whitmore name over my daughter, and the father whose truth reached me too late. "I regret spending so many years believing I had to buy a place for us at their table," I said. "I regret teaching you, without meaning to, that being useful was the price of belonging." Sadie looked toward the sun. "But you don't regret that morning?" I put my arm around her shoulders. "No, I will never regret waking up and taking you with me." A year earlier, we had crossed a dark driveway before sunrise because the people inside had decided my daughter was the easiest person to leave behind. Now the light spread across the water, and neither of us was waiting for permission to call what we had a family. Real family was never the people who shared my mother's last name when it benefited them. It was the girl beside me at sunrise, and the promise I finally kept: no one would ever leave her behind again.